Hi everyone! I'm glad to be back. I'm ready to talk about health literacy and clinical research with you. As you recall, I'm Sylvia Baydorf-Cassis and I'm at the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center. Before I launch into the content, I'll just quickly say the usual disclaimers. These are my opinions. They don't reflect Brigham and Women's Hospitals or Harvard University's positions, and I also don't have any conflicts to report in regards to this presentation. So, before I get into our very brief session together, I'll just give you a very quick overview again of my center, and then we'll talk a little bit about the health literacy opportunity, which I'm pretty sure you've already been spending quite a bit of time discussing and thinking through. And then I'll get into the main content, which is thinking about health literacy across the clinical research life cycle. So the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center, MRCT Center, is really designed, we've come together to improve the integrity, safety, and rigor of global clinical trials. And our mission to that end is to engage diverse stakeholders, to define what these emerging issues might be in the global clinical trial and clinical research landscape, and then create and implement ethical, actionable, and practical solutions. And so practical solutions are really what we're all about. We really want to think a lot about how we might be able to, on the ground, affect change. And that's how this health literacy and clinical research project was born. We had worked on return of results and return of individual results projects in the past. So we've thought about how to communicate at the end of the study, but let's think about now more holistically how to communicate across the clinical trial life cycle. So the opportunity that we're referring to here, of course, refers to the fact that when we look at the US population at large, we know that about 1/3 of the population has difficulty understanding health information. And we presume and we know from the experiences that we've heard from patients and participants themselves that many more struggle with clinical research information because it's complex and the context that they're getting this information in is often a new kind of scary context. And we also know that anyone can struggle with low health literacy. It really depends on that content and the context of information, how it's being given, when it's being given, in what environment, and who's there to help support them understanding that information. We also know that there's different factors that can contribute to low health literacy, and so that includes older age, that includes lower levels of socioeconomic status, markers like income and education, English as a second language, and also racial and ethnic diversity can also contribute to low health literacy. And what we know is that low health literacy affects a person's ability to understand and follow medical instructions, access health services, and make appropriate healthcare decisions. And so that applies to the research environment as well. It's hard to follow research instructions, it's hard to access research or follow research, and then it's hard to make decisions about whether to be in research or stay in research. We also know that clinical trials in the US really lack appropriate diverse representation, making sure that our trials reflect the populations that could benefit from those results. So clear communication, we really believe, can promote inclusion and access. So when we think about health literacy across the research life cycle, and we think about research as not just clinical trials, but also social behavioral studies, survey studies, observational studies, all of these kinds of things can benefit from better communications throughout those life cycles. When we think about a participant's journey then, we've thought about it in our center and with the work group that we developed our resources with as this kind of 5-stage kind of process. The journey starts with a participant discovering, learning about research as a concept. Then it goes on to recruitment, how they get informed about studies and invited to studies. Then there's the consent process, how they learn more about the study and decide whether or not to participate. And then on study, all those points throughout the journey where you have opportunities to reaffirm understanding, provide additional supporting information, and then at the end of study. Of course, plain language summaries, results, the way journal articles are shared, etc. We know that clear communication is essential throughout the participant's journey, throughout the clinical trial life cycle. And so when you think of this trajectory of a research study, if you have some familiarity with the clinical trial life cycle, you know that there's an idea that's formed, and then they go through a development process of developing the protocol. There's all sorts of regulatory pieces that go into it, whether it's an institutional review board application or maybe it's a drug application to FDA. There's recruitment and consent that goes into that discussion process with a potential participant. You're going to collect the data. There'll be a last patient, last visit, where you have your last data collection point, closeouts, and then there's this entire process of data analysis, interpretation of results, and then eventually communicating of results. And so you can imagine that this discovery, recruitment, consent, on-study, and end-of-study process really gets overlaid nicely onto this traditional trajectory. And the stages of the journey through the clinical trial life cycle really has different examples of where you could integrate clear communication. I think it's really important to realize from the beginning that you don't have to fix every document, every point of communication for every study moving forward, going back in time. That's not necessarily the best way to go forward. What we like to think is, what is your next point of communication? What is the next study that you're going to be working on? What is the next material that you have to create that a potential participant might need to review and understand? And start there. We're not thinking that we need to fix every technical communication that's ever gone out to a potential participant. But we do want to start being more mindful about how is it that we can start to integrate health literacy better into our day-to-day practices. So in this table here, there's a lot of information, but the way that we've broken it up is thinking about these different 5 points and what might be helpful at those points. So at the discovery phase, maybe there's more general research awareness campaigns that can be done at your organization, or outreach and engagement efforts to solicit patient and participant input and get that to be integrated into the study design and development. So you're really developing studies that answer questions that patients and study participants care about. In addition, you can have at recruitment advertisements, of course, and those recruitment scripts, those conversations that you might be having to recruit someone to the study can really benefit from health literacy best practices. At consent, of course, we've got the consent scripts, maybe conversations that will go along with the consent forms, because it's usually this needs to be this process. It's not just giving someone a piece of paper and making them read it, but really most studies, especially more technical, complex ones, will integrate some sort of conversation. And so having some scripts that go through what kinds of conversations and questions might come up, how might you use a technique like teach back, where you ask questions and solicit information back from your the person you're communicating with, so that there's a big exchange and dialogue. This is a dynamic process, and we want consent to be seen as something that you can integrate health literacy best practices into to make better conversations. And also to sort of inform those consent conversations, creating study schedules or calendars that you can present to someone and have them walk through the study with you can be really, really helpful. In addition, once someone's on study, not only do you want to have those schedules and calendars ready for them to be able to follow along and know where they are in the study, but you also want to have study medication or intervention instructions, whether or not there's a drug or a device in your study. Maybe it's some other kind of intervention, like a yoga intervention or something like that. But you want the instructions to be clear and understandable. Maybe you'll include something like a study commitment contract that goes over why the study is so important, why we really want to have these well-engaged kind of interactions, and how to maybe go about communicating with the study team if there's challenges to participation. That way you're really having that nice two-way pathway of communication. There can be better adverse event reporting information so that patients and participants know how to communicate when something happens in the study and they need to communicate that to the study team. And of course, having participant satisfaction surveys, not just at the end of the study, but even throughout, so you can collect information on what's working well and what could be improved moving forward for your study participants. And finally, at the end of study, you can have instructions that are clear for how to come off the trial and come out of the study, information on how they might maintain access to treatment options or interventions that have been working for them. Of course, the study results and summaries that would help them understand what the study found and how it might apply to them. All of these are examples of clear communication opportunities where you can start to think about how are how am I going to be able to include some of the things I've learned at the Plain Language for Health workshop into my day-to-day activities? So to that end, in order to help you put that into your day-to-day activities, we do have this health literacy and clinical research website that the Multi-Regional Clinical Trials Center developed with a work group of about 50 people who helped give input on the study materials and the content on the website. Because we really do believe clear communications benefit everyone, not just study participants and patients. Of course, they're the most important audience, but also the members of the clinical trial ecosystem. We want to be able to communicate clearly because it's a benefit to all of us. So our dynamic web-based resource highlights how health literacy applies throughout the clinical trial life cycle. So you'll have more information on that and pointed examples on how that gets integrated into the clinical trial life cycle. We've got best practices to support clear research communications. There's case studies and practical examples of how health literacy has already been integrated into research processes, so you can look at that for inspiration. You could even submit some if you have some great examples. I'd love to build out more case studies into this library. And then there's just more info on ways to take action in your own clinical research role. So the URL's here, mrctcenter.org/health-literacy. And then feel free to follow us. We are regularly posting on LinkedIn and Twitter. There's lots of resources that are very specific to the clinical trial landscape, but we have lots of information that we're also posting about that includes health literacy information. So feel free to follow us, and we look forward to having you join us in our journey. So thanks so much. I hope that this overview is helpful to you and interesting, and that you'll have an opportunity to go through the site, explore some of the resources there, and start to think about how you might be able to integrate it into your own day-to-day work. And if you have any comments or questions or any additional resources that you want to suggest or recommend that I add onto the site, please do not hesitate to reach out. My email address is here on the slide, sbadorfcassis@bwh.harvard.edu. So thanks so much again for everything that you're doing to make communications more clear for our public, patients, and participants. And I look forward to hearing from you at some point in the future.